I want to thank you for being here on a Friday afternoon that happens to be Pearl Harbor Day, as I'm sure you're all well aware. And we are so honored to have this opportunity on Pearl Harbor Day, or on any day, to have a member of our greatest generation here with us to share his story. So we really appreciate him being here with us. I'm going to do a little introduction, and then I'm just going to turn it over to you, okay? So Cy Lichtenfeld was born in Gary, Indiana in 1925, and he served almost 3 years in the U.S. Army during World War II. He was in airborne and combat infantry units as a rifleman. He was captured during the Battle of the Bulge after his unit was surrounded for 3 days and they ran out of food and ammunition. He was taken prisoner at the point of a bayonet and spent the rest of the war as a prisoner of war in Germany. The War Department has awarded him the Combat Infantryman's Badge, the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, the Prisoner of War Medal, the World War II Battle of the Bulge Medal, along with the European Theater of Operations Medal, with 3 battle clusters, as well as many others for his years of service. After World War II, he attended Purdue University and obtained a degree in engineering. He operated a successful business in Chicago and a successful business in Miami. Cy resided in Miami for 47 years with his wife Natalie and their 3 children. In February 2011, they relocated to Mobile to be near family, and we're so glad. He is presently active in the South Alabama Veterans Council, the Military Order of the Purple Heart, the Alabama chapter of the Rolling Thunder, the American Legion, and other service organizations, and other veteran service organizations. In addition, he travels throughout Mobile and Baldwin counties, educating school children and others about World War II, and we are so grateful for that. He was selected as Veteran of the Year for Mobile and Baldwin counties for 2014, and Patriot of the Year in 2016 for the Military Order of the Purple Heart. In April 2014, he was appointed by the Governor of the state of Alabama and continues to serve as a board member of the Alabama State Board of Veterans Affairs. The Library of Congress has accepted his book, Kriegi 312330, which he has written about his experiences as a prisoner of war. So we are so delighted to have Cy Lichtenfeld here today, a member of the greatest generation that saved the world and built this nation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Now I understand why I'm so busy. I'm very pleased to see all of you guys here, especially when learning you've got exams coming up and you could be taking this time for yourselves. Can you hear me in the back? Yes. Good. I especially want to thank Grace Hannon and Nicholas Alford and Mrs. Albrecht for their coordinated efforts in getting me here today to speak before you, especially on this day, which is Pearl Harbor Day, which was the day that we entered World War II. As you probably know, World War II was the greatest struggle against tyranny in the 7,000 years of recorded history. It involved 900 million people, of which 50 million lost their lives, including 458,000 Americans. That war also produced 144,000 American POWs. Today, there are less than 4,000 of us left to survive. Well, that's my topic for you today. An American prisoner of war. American POWs were born during our country's Revolutionary War. They have been in every war, police action, and conflict that our country has been involved in. American POWs have been cold, hot, hungry, tortured, used, abused, humiliated, and beaten. In some wars they have been made to perform work that hurt our fellow American. They did what they could to survive and come home alive. So how did my journey start to becoming a prisoner of war? It all started for me 75 years ago, when I was an 18-year-old kid. probably like some of you. I had not yet graduated from high school, but I had the credits to do so before I entered the Army. My first assignment was with the 88th Airborne Battalion, where I was molded into a fighting warrior. I received parachute, glider training, made 2 jumps out of a perfectly good airplane, and 2 glider landings that I walked away from. The unit was later to become the cadre for the famous 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. I was later assigned to the 106th Infantry Division, and after further training, shipped off overseas to England. And here again we continued our physical training, hardening with 25-mile marches with full field packs and weapons, until they became a walk in the park. I had no knowledge that at that time, that conditioning was to become a huge factor in what allowed me to survive what was ahead of me. At the end of November 1944, we were shipped off to France. We were transported in open trucks, constant rain for 3 days across France, Luxembourg, and Belgium. And our outfit was assigned to the Ardennes Forest in eastern Belgium, and those portions of the fortified Siegfried Line in which had been captured. My new home, with 12 other men, became a 10-foot by 8-foot, 6-foot deep dugout, covered with branches and logs, and about 1,000 feet behind the front lines. We had no electricity, no heat, and only one small lantern for light. We dug shelves into the sides of the dugout in order to sleep. Our defenses consisted of about 2-man foxholes, about 500 feet in front of our dugout, and a 1-man foxhole about another 500 feet in front of that. Our spacing was 150 feet apart, 1/2 size, the size of a football field. Our division, along with 4 other divisions, 12,000 riflemen, protected 88 miles of the front, approximately the distance from here to Gulfport, Mississippi. We went into combat in early December '44, and I participated in recon and combat patrols. Our schedule was 2 hours on, 4 hours off, 24/7, manning our foxholes and outposts. You ate and slept whenever you had a chance. On December the 16th, after having come in off a patrol, I was sleeping in my shelf in the dugout when about 5:30 in the morning a continuous artillery barrage hit us for about an hour. The ground shook from the tremendous heavy shells that were exploding all around us, and I was thrown out of my sleeping shelf. We made our way out to our assigned foxholes during the barrage, and many men were hit from shrapnel from the tree bursts as we awaited for an infantry and tank attack. I learned years later that morning over 250,000 Germans, consisting of 3 armies, hit us that morning, concentrating their efforts on our weakly held positions. Their objective was to capture 3 strategic road networks behind us, one being Bastogne, which was 27 miles behind me. What they didn't expect was the tenacity and courage of American infantry, and my unit in particular. Even though being surrounded for 3 days, we fought until our food and ammunition was exhausted. The German plan was to wipe us out in the first 12 hours. Our stand disrupted their timetable and allowed American reserves to be rushed into the line. Eventually, over 1 million men fought in what is now known as the Battle of the Bulge. The U.S. suffered over 78,000 killed, wounded, or missing in that battle. In my case, my foxhole buddy and I had only 11 rounds of ammo left and had not eaten in 2 days. The final attack occurred late in the afternoon of the 3rd day of being surrounded, when white parka-clad German infantry made a bayonet charge into our lines, tossing hand grenades into our foxholes. After exhausting our final ammo, we jumped out of our hole, hoping to prevent them from throwing a grenade in on us. I saw a German heading straight at me, yelling, "Raus mit the Hans! Raus mit the Hans!" My body was frozen in fear. I could not get my hands up. He jabbed at me with his bayonet, and it hit the button on my field jacket and sliced my jacket's left shoulder. He retracted and was about to stick me again when I was able to get my hands up. And that is the moment when my status changed from a combat infantryman to a prisoner of war. Every ex-POW I have encountered has told a different story of his capture and subsequent treatment. However, they all report the feeling of humiliation and shock. The most asked question of an ex-POW is, what was it like? Well, allow me to summarize an answer reflecting only on my facets of being a prisoner. The first was hunger. A hunger that is forced on you from the lack of solid food for months on end. A hunger that will force you to eat anything and everything that is available. The second is cold. A cold that racks your body, an uncomfortable shivering, and causes your mind to become dull to the effects of it. Next is fear, a nameless terror that takes control of your body and mind. A fear when you lose control of your body functions as bombs fall on you in a locked boxcar. Fear of catching a horrible disease that is running rampant in the camp, and you know there are no medicines or medical personnel that can help you. The worst fear, of course, is never again being free and seeing your loved ones. Depression is a fourth effect on the mind. Thoughts of family and home lock your mind in endless daydreams, wondering and worrying if they know you are alive. This, perhaps, is one of the cruelest of tortures. There's another question asked of me. I'm Jewish. Did they know? Well, to that question, yes and no. Yes, they knew, and no, I didn't know. Let me explain. When I was interrogated by a graduate of Penn University who spoke perfect English, asked me for my religion, I replied atheist. I had destroyed my dog tags just prior to being captured. Why? Because during World War II, all dog tags had your religion stamped on them for the chaplain's use in the event of our death. Mine had an H on them for Hebrew. It was only later, after my liberation by Russians, that I found my prison record and discovered I had not fooled anyone, as it was plainly indicated Jew across the face of it. After being captured, I was forced marched for 3 days on frozen feet, no food or water, made to lie down in the snow in the frozen fields with no shelter, and only my field jacket as my outer covering, and the temperature never getting above freezing. On the 4th day, about 40 miles east from where I was captured, I was packed with 65 other GIs into a boxcar, which would normally hold 40 men. Our car had previously contained horses, and their manure was still covering the thin layer of straw on the floor. We were so tight that it was impossible to sit down. On Christmas Eve, our train was in a rail yard, and the IRF bombed us. Many cars were destroyed, with many casualties. And others unlocked our boxcar, and we all sought shelter on the embankments. After the raid was over, we were forced back onto the train, and this boxcar was my home for the next 7 days. As the wounded died, we stacked them erect in the corner, which gave us a little bit more room. We had no food or water for the first 3 days, and many of my comrades became delirious. Then we were allowed to pass out our helmets for water and a loaf of black bread for each group of 8 men. Of course, you know what our helmets have been used for during this time, so all of us came down with dysentery, which made the situation even worse. In the next 10 days, I was transported to two different prison camps, each further east. The last was on the Oder River, on the Polish border. I was just getting settled in when the Russians started their winter offensive, and the Germans forced us to vacate the camp. All this time, I was fighting the effects of frozen feet, with no medication or medical assistance. Due to the swelling, I was unable to put on my combat boots. But with the help of another GI who donated part of his overcoat, I made booties to wrap around my feet and was able to shuffle along on the icy roads with 5,000 other Americans on a 110-mile forced march with the temperature barely getting above zero. As we shuffled along through the villages, the children would throw stones at us, sick their dogs on us, women would dump water on us from the second story to add to our misery. Any defensive action that we would take would result in being bayoneted or shot. Unfortunately, many of my fellow POWs did not complete that march. During those 10 days, we slept in open fields, huddled together in each other's arms to keep from freezing to death, and guarded by vicious German Shepherd and Doberman dogs. At night, we crawled around, found the animal dung mounds, and dug up potatoes and turnips that the farmers had buried for the winter. We scrubbed them on our clothing to be able to eat them raw. And for water, we scooped up snow and melted it in our mouths. And to this day, some 75 years later, I cannot eat the skin of a potato. Upon arrival in our new camp, the south of Berlin, we were issued 2 thin blankets and housed in circus tents. This was my home until I was liberated by the Russians in the middle of 1945. Our daily rations had consisted of a cup of hot water, colored water in the morning, a thin soup, and if lucky, with pieces of wild boar with the skin and fur still on it for lunch, followed by another cup of hot water for dinner. Every 3 days, a 1-pound loaf of black bread made with 50% sawdust was issued to 5 men to supplement our diet. Every 3 weeks or so, a 10-pound Red Cross parcel was issued to 5 men to share, consisting of a 1-pound can of powdered milk, a spoon of jam, 5 crackers, a wedge of cheese, a 4-ounce meat spread, and 5 cigarettes. There was 1 water hose connection in our compound, and men would line up all day to get a cup of water for personal hygiene. As mentioned, this was an American compound, as each nationality was separated by huge fences. And there were 7 of these compounds in this camp, with a total of about 60,000 prisoners. One day in April, all American prisoners were forced to line up in front of our tents. The Germans then ordered all Jews to step forward. Immediately, a whispered command was passed through the ranks. No one stepped forward. The Germans went crazy, threatening to shoot everyone. And after a couple of hours of this, and when it appeared they were going to start shooting people, another whispered command went through the ranks. Everyone stepped forward. Well, the Germans became even more violent, and we were forced to stand at attention in the rain all day without our meager rations. Well, this was my only experience for being a Jew, but was the formation of a bond of friendship formed behind enemy barbed wire that exists to this day. Why the Germans never looked at my prison record, only the good Lord knows. A week later, the same situation arose. We were forced to stand in front of our tents all day. This time the German officers seemingly were arguing amongst themselves. Years later, I learned and verified by the International Red Cross that that day Hitler had ordered all American prisoners to be shot. On the morning of April 22nd, 1945, we heard artillery and gunfire not far away, but we did not know whose it was. A tank came down alongside the fence and made a sharp right turn, flattened the fence. And when the turret opened, a large furry cat emerged with a toothless face and exclaimed, "Ruski." Well, you can imagine the pandemonium that erupted through the camp when the realization came through that we had been freed. After the Russians liberated us, they indicated we, Americans, would be sent back to a U.S. military control by way of Odessa on the Black Sea, some 1,500 miles to the east. Even though the Americans, we found out through our crystal radio sets, were only 100 miles to the west. What we didn't know was that that was where they were going to stop. For the next 2 weeks, the Russians made no attempt to contact the Americans. They were not too kind to us, and worse to the German population, we had to forage for our own food. And I'm referring to seeing 60,000 men of all nationalities from the prison camp running amok through these villages and farms looking for food. I among them, raiding farmhouses, catching chickens, killed them on the spot, cooked them over open fires, and then we tried to eat them. We discovered our stomachs had shrunk so that we could not digest solid food. After about 2 weeks, I joined 6 other GIs. We armed ourselves with some weapons that some friendly Russians gave us. We decided to leave the camp and started out to find the American lines. We made our way through the German and Russian lines at night, sleeping in barns, abandoned buildings for about 100 miles until we found the Americans on the west side of the Elbe River on May 8th, 1945, the day Germany surrendered. And I like to think that they surrendered when they heard I had rejoined the U.S. Army. Even my return to American control did not go smoothly. You can imagine how we looked. We were in the same uniforms we had been captured in, long beards, and hair long before it became fashionable, and looked like thousands of refugees jamming the roads, trying to get away from the Russians. We spotted an American truck some 500 yards ahead of us. We fired our weapons into the air to attract their attention. They stopped and fired their weapon right at us, a 50 caliber machine gun with a couple of bursts, thankfully not hitting us. We screamed that we were American POWs, and they ordered me, the most forward one, forward, and identify myself. I was asked about what hometown was. I said, Gary, Indiana. Then he asked me what high school I went to, which I thought was strange. Upon answering Lou Wallace High, he said the most beautiful words I have ever heard. Come on in, soldier. Your high school beat my high school for this year's state basketball championship. And at that moment, my designator changed from prisoner of war to a GI once again. I showered, was deloused, given a fresh uniform, started to look like a soldier again. Went to the barber shop, got all the curly locks cut off, gave my overseas cap, jaunty tilt, started to feel pretty good about myself. At the camp infirmary, I tipped the scales at just over 100 pounds. That meant I lost some 65 pounds during my prison stay. Our experiences as POWs are absolutely unknown to most Americans and veterans, and ones we can never forget. We cannot even relate what it was like to our closest friends and family. Living as close to death for as long as we did, we learned the real difference between good and bad, and we learned to judge human beings by absolute standards and what real friendship is. These are the things that we cannot forget and have become a part of our lives. Today, most of us former POWs are still plagued with recurring nightmares and always those nagging questions. What was it all for? What good did it do? Finally, does anybody care? For me, the answers that have come by revisiting the battlefield, talking to the people whose lives were liberated, by the monuments that have been built both abroad and here, and by you who honor all veterans, the living, the missing, and the dead. At the beginning of your past Veterans Day ceremony, we recited the Pledge of Allegiance. However, there is another pledge, the Prisoner of War Pledge of Allegiance, and I'd like to share it with you now. I pledge allegiance to the flag. I am an American. I was a POW. I have served my country. I need no one to tell me what allegiance I owe to my flag, to my home, of the United States of America. This is my country. I have fought for it. I have been in prison for it. Some have died for it. And to the republic for which it stands. This flag stands for me, for love for my family, my love for my friends. I did not forsake it when I was beaten, when I was starved, and when some were killed. one nation under God, indivisible. I am one man. I have one country. I worship one God. And under God I was saved. Under God I have no fear. With liberty and justice for all. My allegiance is to liberty and to justice. My flag represents the best of myself, my effort, my home, my country. I will pledge allegiance to the flag. I will pledge under the love of God. It is my right, my privilege, my duty. I have earned it. Tell me not how. I have given you much. I am an ex-POW. Now I'd like to leave with you one lasting thought. Somebody paid for your freedom to sit in that seat and on this floor today, because freedom is not free. So when you see a service person or a veteran, wherever you see them, stand up and thank them. I want to thank you all for listening to an old soldier's war story. My message for you today, I hope, is to learn history so that the mistakes of the past are not repeated in the future. Program yourself to use the freedoms that were paid for by your fellow Americans by building a strong commitment to an education for yourself so that you can be a positive force to your family, to your God, and to your country. And at this time, I would like to present to your library a copy of my book that has been accepted by the Library of Congress so that you can share it with all. You bet. With the permission of Mr. Ulbricht, I am open to any questions you might have. Now let me tell you, I'll answer anything personal or otherwise, but I will not answer any questions regarding combat. That deal? Anybody? Oh, come on, somebody's got a question. Yes, sir.
How old were you when you got captured?
I was still 19. I had my 20th birthday in prison camp. How many in here are 18 years old? There you go. I had just turned 18 when I went in the service. Anybody else?
Oh, y'all have some questions. I have a question.
Yes.
So in the prisoner of war camp, you know, there was the starvation and the cold and all the deprivations that were so horrible. What did you draw on within yourself or with your other prisoners of war to maintain your hope and your humanity?
Actually, it was a day by day. You were lucky to get up that morning, because sometimes the fellow alongside of you didn't get up. The best way I can describe it is, we've all heard that cliche, survival of the fittest, and if it ever comes to pass, that's where it shows up. It's the survival of the fittest, not only physically, mentally, but within you, the desire that you must keep going no matter what. And it just drives you. It's something that you can't describe, you can't put it in words, but it's there. It's a force.
Well, what was it like when you came back home and did you go immediately to work? You know, did you go immediately to Purdue? What was it like as you transitioned from this situation into home?
Well, you got to remember, first of all, there were 16 million of us that served in World War II. And after we came home from the war, we went about doing our business, picking up our lives where we left off. Since I had already had enough credits and I had the high school graduation certificate, which my mother had to go get when they walked across the stage, I first went out to work. I worked in the steel mills. But then I realized that there was something more in life for me, and that's when I decided to go to Purdue University. And I was very fortunate that the GI Bill of Rights was in effect, and I was able to, because otherwise I would have never been able to have a college education. And that was basically the foundation for the rest of my life. I learned how hard work, how to achieve things. I mean, today, very honestly, I have a granddaughter now at the University of Florida, and she tells me she's carrying 15 credits, and it's so much, I have to reflect back, my God, I used to carry 21. How did we used to do it? But it was a drive, again, that unseen drive that we wanted to succeed. And I think that was characteristics of not only myself, but a lot of the men and women who returned from World War II. And one of the things that we built on to help why they call us the greatest generation. Yes, ma'am.
While you were captured, did your family know, or did they have to wait until you were liberated
No.
to find out?
My mother received a telegram the day after my birthday on January the 11th that I had been missing in action. And they knew nothing about me being a prisoner of war until late in April, when they received a letter that I had smuggled, that had been smuggled out of Germany for me. How it got smuggled out, I have no idea. But I had written a letter. I was with a bunch of British POWs at one of the prison camps, and they told me to write this little letter, and that they would get it out. Now, they had been captured since North Africa, and they'd been in prison for 4 years. They had ways and means. My buddy and I both wrote letters. Mine got through. His family never learned. And mine got this letter in April of 1945. They forwarded it on to the War Department, and the War Department then changed my status from missing in action to a prisoner of war. They still did not know if it was true or not, until I made the phone call from Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, that I was back in the States. Yes.
So did you say that you were in the, is it the 501st Airborne Division? Which Airborne Division were you in?
No, I was with the 88th.
The 88th
88th Airborne Battalion.
Battalion.
This is an outfit that was before the 81st. This is when the U.S. Army was first starting to, shall we say, experiment with airborne divisions because of the success that the Germans had in Crete using a parachute drop to capture that island.
Yes, sir. I was going to ask you about your training, like what type of training did y'all have? Was it like intense? Was like I've read like Band of Brothers and it said like a lot about.
If you've read Band of Brothers, that's the exact training we had.
Okay.
We had a mountain called Bear Butte, 3,500 feet, and we used to have to run up and down it with full field packs, just like that. If anybody has seen that series of Band of Brothers, the training that was in that particular sequence was the exact training that I had.
And were you one of the soldiers who was on that march from like where, I can't remember the base, but like y'all marched all the way to Atlanta? Or it was, were you part of that march that was like, I think it was 150 mile march?
Well, there were many marches towards the end of the war when the Germans were trying to keep the Americans from getting into Russian hands, because the Germans at that time wanted to have the American prisoners of war as bargaining chips so that they could have something to bargain with. And they were constantly moving prisoners from the east to the west to try to keep them away from the Russians. But there were many, many marches of that type.
I'm talking about the march. They had a march that was in retaliation to, well, it said like the Japanese had a march that was like.
No, the Bataan March, no, we didn't.
Y'all did not have
No, we didn't have a march of that nature. Ours was in bitter cold.
Yes, sir.
Have you been back to Germany?
Yes. I had made a vow that I would never go back, but my wife was a travel agent. And you know what you say, yes, dear. We went back as a family one time, and then after my son graduated and from school and such, he and I went back to Germany to the battlefields. And we had spent 8 months prior to going back of getting action reports and knowing where my outfit fought and everything else. And we found the foxholes because they were in the German force. And It was very eerie to be back into an area that I had been in so many years before. And we were back in the summertime, but yet when I went back into the forest when the sun's out bright, you still couldn't see 25 feet in front of you. It was that dense. But I have been back to the battlefields. I met some wonderful people in Belgium. I have learned how they appreciate Americans and for what we did as Americans to liberate them from the occupational forces that were governing them. Oh, okay.
Did you ever find out any information about the war while you were prisoners of war?
About which?
About information about World War II, what was going on while y'all were POWs?
No. It wasn't towards the latter part of the war that our crystal radio sets were starting to be able to come into existence. And that's when we found out that we had crossed the Rhine, that the Americans were driving. But as I say, we were not getting daily reports. We had no idea what was going on.
Do you still keep in touch? Do you have anybody that was in the prisoner of war camp that you still keep in touch with?
Unfortunately, all of my buddies are gone. The last one died about 5 years ago. We used to exchange Christmas cards every year. And I was notified by his family that he passed on.
One of the things that really moved me in your book was looking at it from a parent standpoint and thinking about what it was like for your family to have such limited information in telegrams. And I know when you said when you finally came back and saw your mother again, her hair had turned white. Did she ever overcome all of that trauma to a satisfactory degree?
Whether she overcame it or not, I don't know. What he's referring to is when I left home and I joined the service, my mother had beautiful auburn hair. She played the piano. When I came back, she was snow white. And they tell me that when she received the telegram that I was missing in action, it turned white overnight practically. But she put my picture on the piano and she used to talk to it every night. And she affirmed to everyone that I was not dead, that I was coming back, and I firmly believe that it was through her faith and prayers and the prayers of everybody else in the community, in the family, and all my friends that helped bring me back. Because there were so many, many times that I would not be here today. Yes, sir.
How did you keep your faith in God through your troubles and tribulations?
It was there. I mean, you didn't apply it. It was always there. You somehow or other you had a driving force within you. You knew that you were going to make it. What was that force? I don't know. Did I sit down and pray every night? No. The only time I really did pray was when I was in my foxhole and the artillery was coming in on me. And when they tell you there's an atheist in a foxhole, somebody's lying. They've never been in a foxhole with artillery coming in on them. Because it's there and it's loud. But it was a driving force within you. It was that same force that made you survive, made you want to go on. When you didn't want to take that next step, you just wanted to lay down. It was that you forced yourself to do it. And that was it was a combined thing. Many, many variables came into place that forced you to do that. And one of them was your faith. And I don't think it was just faith then. I think it was the faith that you were brought up with. I think it was the faith that your parents taught you and you believed in.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Nobody else? Yes, ma'am.
Did you suffer, you mentioned that you lost 65 pounds. Did you suffer any sort of health problems as a result of your time as prisoner of war?
Yes. I have many health problems. Malnutrition is one of them that has plagued me all my life. You just do not recover from those kind of things. It takes a long time. Behind the post, okay.
When you said you were down to your final rounds, did y'all ever have to pick up German weapons to fight back? You were running out of ammo?
You didn't have German weapons at the time. First of all, they had different ammunition. And at the time, you're dealing with your own. My best friend was my rifle. And when your rifle runs out of ammunition, you've lost your friend. It's a very, very strange feeling to know that somebody's out there ready to come at you and want to take your life. And you have very, very little to defend yourself with when you run out of ammunition. Especially when you're in a deprived condition as it is. We hadn't eaten for so long, and we were weak, and constantly under attack for the 3 days. So there's a lot of variables that go into that that make you don't think about those things. You're thinking about survival at the time, and how do I keep him from putting that bayonet in me, and how do I keep a grenade out of my foxhole? With no other questions, I thank you very, very much for giving of your time and coming to hear, as I said, an old soldier's story.
Well, we thank you so much.